You are listening to the Licorice All Sports podcast with your host, Robert Winston. On today's podcast, I'll be speaking with former Richmond Tiger, Brisbane Lion, and Gold Coast Sun player Andrew Rains, who played 129 games of AFL footy and kicked 17 goals in a career that spanned over 10 years. We'll be talking about the sad passing of Shane Tuck on Monday night and going back to the timeline of 2003 to 2009 when Andrew Rains donned the famous yellow and black sash with Shane Tuck in the early part of their careers. So if you enjoy this podcast and many more to come, please give us a follow on Spotify. Thanks for listening, and let's get into it. And on the line today, I have former Richmond, Brisbane Lion and Gold Coast player, 129 games and 17 goals. On the line, Andrew Rains, up in the Goldie. Welcome to Licorice All Sports. Thank you so much for joining.
No worries. Great to have me on board, mate. I'm looking forward to it.
Definitely, mate. Now, obviously, on Monday night, the tragic news of Shane Tuck, a favourite Tiger, played 173 games, kicked 74 goals over a 10-year career. You started your career at Richmond, Andrew, from 2004 to 2009. Tucky was in that same timeline. He was a little bit older than yourself. Just tell the listeners what it was like playing with such a hardened in and under midfielder, and what were some of his attributes that he brought to the Richmond team week in, week out?
Yeah, so I got obviously drafted with Tucky, as you said, back in late 2003. He was a mature age, sort of pick up, and I was only sort of 17 at the time, but formed a great relationship on and off the field with Tucky. I think there's been tributes flying all week about the great man, about how unique he was, and every time we think of him, it's probably a smile, so a bit of a chuckle about some off-field antics, and also to the huge respect he had on the field. And we forged out a career together probably at the start, probably the first half of the year, played a fair bit of footy together at Coburg in the VFL, and that was firsthand where I first sort of got to experience how tough he was on field. And I reckon he probably looking back, forged that new age midfielder in terms of being sort of over 188 centimetres or pushing 190. And you see Bonampelli and players like running around today, and Patrick Cripps, and I reckon he was probably the first sort of tallish, big body midfielder that really took the game by storm, and he just created that in and under tenacity of the football, and was also really good overhead too. He could take a really good mark, and as I said, you grew taller running alongside him.
Now, you mentioned growing taller, running alongside Tucky. Tell me, some of those memories. Is there a specific memory that you can recall in a big game? You would have played in games, during time of the G, some of the biggest games against Collingwood, Carlton, etc. Is there any one moment that really sticks out when you were running alongside Tucky?
A couple of moments. Those, the bigger games, and as you said before, you want to have your Warriors out there in the big games, and obviously we played some very big games at Richmond on the MCG, and there's more so probably the wet games that stood out, and I think there's been a few tributes about his performances in the wet, and just his size and ability to be super clean and in and under. I think those stood out. It was a game in I think it was around sort of middle of the year, round 13, versus Collingwood in 2006, and I think Collingwood were sort of top four at the time. We came out and beat him that day, and it was just one of those perfect days for everyone. We just turned it on, and I distinctly remember Tucky just in and under that day, and his huge efforts. And there's obviously a couple of really big clashes against some arch rivals that really stood out. So his efforts in those big games, and in particular on the wet, were unreal.
Off the field, Tucky was pretty well known to be pretty outgoing, especially to just the general Tiger supporters, and obviously everyone knew he was. Just in my own personal experience, I only met him a handful of times, and he always gave up his time, always asked, how you going? Is that the kind of bloke you saw off the field as well, Andrew?
Yeah, just a guy that would sort of obviously have a chat to the average punter and would be more than happy to give up 10, 15 minutes of his time and asking questions about them. Usually as a player and someone with a bit of a profile, a lot of supporters or fans would ask you all the questions, and he was that type of player or person that would would always ask how you're going as a supporter or fan. I used to pick up that a fair bit with him, and he'd be having chats with people down the race, and wouldn't know him from bar or soap, but he'd be saying, how's things, and how old's your son, or how old's your daughter, or something like that. So he was always really giving, and I think that was probably a great attribute of his to have, and we always remember that, I suppose. And he was always generous enough with his time, and especially being a mate and a teammate, he was really good like that. So he'd be sorely missed with those type of things that great people always give and do.
Do you think it's more impressive the fact that he played 173 games when he was a son of a gun? Michael Tuck was obviously known at Hawthorn. He won 7 premierships, and he held the AFL league record for games, which was 426 up until 2016 when Boomer Harvey broke that record. Do you think that makes it even more impressive about how his career went? Because he really did forge his own identity at Richmond after, unfortunately, getting delisted at Hawthorn early in his career.
Yeah, it was really good, and obviously it rings home true to me with my father too. So I think we had that common sort of bond, I suppose, being sons of former AFL legends, and there's a lot of pressure that goes with that coming through. And I actually had a few chats with Tucky over the years about that, and he reckons moving away from Hawthorn was probably the best thing he did. For me, it was obviously I was at Richmond and Dad was a Richmond great, so it was a tiny bit different. So for Tucky to go to another club and do that, I think that was pretty special. And it was probably not until I sort of went to Brisbane and realised that, and probably something Tucky did, and it probably no regrets about sort of playing for Richmond or leaving Richmond. But the best thing probably was to sort of play for a different club than your father. I think that was pretty big and the pressure that comes with that. So for Tucky to do that, I think it was superb, and play over 170 games. It's no mean feat.
Definitely, Andrew. And look, it has been confirmed. All the articles in the paper, his dad really poured his heart out. Michael, if you do need help, seek help. With the modern day of mental health and Tucky unfortunately didn't really speak out because he was a really tough man and proud man. Is there anything you'd like to say just for the younger generation out there if they are feeling, a little bit stressed, or they do feel that anxiety or mental issues? What would be your message, as a former professional athlete and also a current day coach?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and we deal with it all the time being a coach and seeing young kids come through. But it's not just kids; it's adults, and you hear these stories all the time. But I think the big one is to get it off your chest, and it's okay to be vulnerable. And you hear all those cliches along the way too. But I think opening up with your mates is obviously a good one, and sharing those common bonds, because you don't know what the other person's going through sometimes. So sometimes you do find that you're not actually going too bad. It feels a lot better when you get off your chest. But at the same time too, is I just don't have an understanding of how deep that can go, and unfortunately a lot of us don't. So it's a hard place to sort of comment. But also too is there is professional help out there, and I could probably advise that more strongly. Okay, sort of getting that professional help and seeking that help if you are having those, I suppose, those mental battles.
Very well said, Andrew. Now, Andrew, just to drift away from this conversation, what are you up to these days? I do believe you're a coach up at the Gold Coast Academy, and would you like to tell the listeners what else you get up to in your spare time as far as business and general life up at the Gold Coast?
Yeah, so I'm head coach of the Gold Coast Suns Academy. So I've been doing that since I retired back in 2015. Been a sensational role, just dealing with the up-and-coming kids and being a Queenslander myself, and seeing now the direct pathway to an AFL list, which is exciting, and a couple of players playing week in, week out. It's always great to sort of see that you've played a bit of part in their career, so it's been really good. Also created a platform last year and a half, 2 years, which has had huge growth throughout the COVID period, and we're ticking along really nicely. It's one-on-one football, which is an online platform connecting AFL or accredited AFL coaches with footballers for private tuition. So essentially, you type in your local area on the system, and or suburb or region, and a coach will hopefully pop up in that area, and you book in them with a session, and you can choose coaches from different expertise, whether it's females are looking for a female coach, or a kicking coach or a marking coach or whatever you're looking to work on your game. We've also launched some online programs. Obviously, through the COVID period, it's been pretty tough, so we've got access to exercises and drills and things like that you can do from home. And we feel like we've got a really good platform and system and building. So it takes a lot of my time at the moment. 120 plus coaches and sort of growing by the day throughout Australia. So, if you're listening and looking to improve your game, www.oneonOnefootball.com.au and jump on and find your coach.
Great initiative there for especially the next generation, the youth coming through. Down here in Melbourne, Rainsy, we can't even get enough football ovals because of all the female teams coming through. And I suppose it's a really good problem to have, especially for the future. And obviously, at the moment, the COVID-19 restrictions don't allow anyone to play sport at the moment, but I think it's just a great initiative that you're doing there, oneonOnefootball.com.au. So if any of the listeners out there, make sure you jump on board. And the last one, Raisy, before we go, I just want to ask you, back in 2006, you played for Australia in the International Rule Series against Ireland. Tell us a little bit about that and what was that experience like representing your country?
I was actually saying the other day to someone, they were asking me what my greatest achievement was, and I actually reflected back to winning the series over in Ireland against. I didn't play. I wasn't fortunate enough to play any finals throughout my AFL career, but that was probably the best moment. Travelling over there with the likes of Michael Voss, Dustin Fletcher, Fev at the time, and some other really high class players that were going around at the time, and to win over there in front of, I think it was 90,000 at Croke Park to beat the Irish in game two, beat the Irish boys in game two was probably a moment I'll never forget. So that was an incredible journey and something you sort of probably take for granted. I was only 20 at the time in my third year, and to play alongside, as I said, some of those great players and forge some great relationships was unbelievable.
Well said, Andrew. I really do appreciate coming on Licorice All Sports podcast this afternoon, and I'm sure all the Richmond faithful, the supporters and footy fans alike are going to really appreciate you giving up your time and just giving your view on what kind of a teammate Tucky was. And, once again, thank you very much.
No worries, Rob. Thanks for having me, mate.
No worries. Take care, and I'm sure we'll speak soon. Thanks very much, mate.
Cheers.